Hey, I'm former marijuana smuggler Brian O'Day, and I'm chatting with Staxx.
Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Brian, former marijuana smuggler. What's
Hey,
up,
bro.
Brian? How you
Hi,
doing?
Bill. I'm doing good. How about you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to come on my show. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Where did it all start for you? Where are you born and raised?
St. John's, Newfoundland, in Canada. It's an island on the east coast of Canada.
What was your early life like?
Oh, it was great. You know, my dad owned a brewery. We had good times, and I went to a Catholic boys' school. At 11 years old, I got abused by the principal of the school, and that went on for a year or so. And that kind of changed the direction of my life. You know, I was a Catholic, and I was taught that to entertain the thought of sex beyond its coming and going was a mortal sin, and you're going to go to hell forever. And so when that happened to me, I began a negotiation with God not to kill me. So, as I like to say, my mind became a great place to get out of. When I discovered alcohol and drugs, I'm in, baby.
Oh, so you dove right in head first into the alcohol and drugs?
Alcohol when I was young, and then when I went to university, someone turned me on to a joint, and I looked at the economics of it a little bit, and kind of got into business.
So how do you get into the business of smuggling? Like, so you get introduced to a joint, right? And how does it progress?
How does it go from a joint to 75 tons? Is that the question?
Yeah.
When I smoked a joint, I was in Nova Scotia at university. It was my first year. And back in Newfoundland, where I had come from, there was no dope there at all. But there was dope in Nova Scotia, and I smoked it, and I liked it. So I grabbed a bag of it and brought it back to Newfoundland. And man, that was gone in 5 minutes by people who wanted to try it. And of course, everybody wanted it. And so I was able to get a little bit and sell a little bit and a little bit more. And then I was going up to Ontario and buying larger amounts and
How are you bringing it back?
just putting it in my bag. In those days, it was nothing, you know,
Are you driving or flying back?
flying. And then I got introduced to some people in England where I could get hash really cheap, like a fifth of what I would pay for it in Ontario. And so I started going to Europe and having people go there and packing their bodies full of hash and bringing that back.
It was more lax on the planes, though, right?
Much more. There was no security, at the gate. There was nothing. You could go, even if you weren't going anywhere, you could walk into the airport and go to the gate. And there was nothing. There was no preventative measures anywhere. It was a great time to be living and flying around.
Yeah.
And in '72, I got popped and got 19 months in a place called Her Majesty's Penitentiary in St. John's, Newfoundland. No toilets and no running water.
Can you walk me through when you got caught?
So I had been introduced to these people in England, and I went over there and bought a bunch of hash, brought it back, and then had them mail back, package it, secrete it in some packaging, if you know, which of course they didn't do a great job, and send it to the house next door to where I lived. There was no one living there, and I knew no one was living there at that time. So I sent it to a non existent person, made up a name to that house next door, and then I could keep my eye on, see when a package got left there. And I got the first. There were two packages. The first one I got. The second one, the police delivered it to me. Basically, let me just say that. And I got arrested for that, even though it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to the house next door. They said they found a registration number for the package written on a piece of paper in my apartment that matched the registration number on the package. That was a lie. But, what could I do? So I got 19 months for that. I got out of there, um, and I hopped on a plane to Colombia, and I started flying little bits of coke back into Newfoundland and moving that until I got a sufficient enough stash, and I moved into Jamaica, and that's where I spent the next kind of 5 years, living in Jamaica and Colombia, and running stuff into Canada and into the United States.
Did
And
any
then
any major situations happen to you during this time? Did anyone ever try to rob you, or when you're going out trying to find these drugs from different places in different countries? Did anything major happen?
yeah, well, a couple of interesting things. I was in Colombia setting up a boatload in Barranquilla. My Colombian contact was there with a woman who worked for him from time to time, a woman from Jamaica. She had her two children with her, young girls that were twin 3-year-olds, and they're 4-year-olds. They were very, very little. And Barranquilla was really, in those days, it was a tough town. And there, in Colombia in those days, and I'm pretty sure it's still the same, people sold cigarettes in the street. And there was this guy outside the hotel where I stayed, the Royal Levelo, uh, that I used to buy. I was smoking Lucky Strikes at the time. And I used to buy my Luckies from this guy. He'd see me coming, he'd take his cigarettes, ba, ba, ba. And he always liked to see me coming. He always liked to sell me cigarettes. I'd always give him a tip. Anyway, one day, it was a Sunday, and we were having a meeting at the hotel with the captain of the boat, my Colombian connections, my guys from Chicago. We were taking a break. So I took the two little girls. I said, I'm going to take the girls and go for a walk. It was Sunday. We'll just walk around. It was downtown Barranquilla. So I'm probably 15 minutes from the hotel, walking, holding these little girls, one in each hand, and looking in the store windows and just chatting. And I look up, and there's the cigarette guy from the hotel. And I go, whoa, what are you doing? And he rushes across to me and he sticks something in my shirt pocket. I look down like this. As I'm looking, a hand with a badge in it slides in next to my pocket. And I look up, and it's a plainclothes cop with two guys who are not plainclothes with their submachine guns, and saying, "What is this?" and pulling a little bag of 2 or 3 grams of pot out of my pocket. And I go, "What the?" Anyway, this guy's all apologetic, but he's going to have to lock me up, and that's all there is to it. And, between the jigs and the reels, we end up back in my hotel. I had 9 grand in my room. So I knew I was going to have to give him something. So I gave him 2 grand, and he laughed and he threw the 2 grand back down. He got out of that room with 7 grand. That's
But you didn't
and
go to jail. You didn't go to
but
jail.
I didn't go to jail. And my friends, when I went down and burst in the room and said, "You'll never guess what fucking happened to me," they all thought that was the funniest thing they ever heard. Anyway, so yeah, that happened to me. I dropped a plane in the ocean off the coast of Colombia shortly after that, with 16,000 pounds in it.
Walk me
Um,
through that one. Walk me through that.
we bought a DC-6, a 4-engine old troop carrying plane. And we actually didn't buy it. We kind of took it out of a plane graveyard, had someone look the other way, gave them some money. And man, it was this fucking thing was a bucket of bolts. We took possession of a unused former airport in Moultrie, Georgia, and we leased it under the auspices of having a plane repair facility there, hiring people here in Moultrie, good old Moultrie, Georgia. And of course, we got a very favorable deal that the city was glad to turn the airport over to us. And we flew this plane in and, tuned it up and took off to Colombia. Now, we had a pilot. He had flown a twin engine over 2,000 hours. He flew for Perlator. Um, but he'd never flown a four engine plane, but he read the book and said he could do it, but he needed someone to go with him. I, who could fly the seat of my pants, said, okay, I'll go. So I went with him. Wow. Hard to believe that I'd do that looking back on it. But anyway, we hopped on that plane and took off to Colombia. No heater in the plane. It was freezing cold. Uh, we got halfway down and he turned to me and he said, hey, would you rather crash in Colombia or the United States? I said, I wouldn't rather crash anywhere. What are you talking about? He said, well, we're losing hydraulic pressure. And I'm not sure that when I drop the landing gear, it's going to stay open because there's a leak in the line, obviously. Now there's a case of fluid just outside the cockpit there. And we're going to pour that in there and try and land this plane, but we got to take a chance that we're going to crash when we land it. Where do you want to do it? So I said, let's go back to the US, buddy. I don't want to crash in Colombia. We'll never get out of there. So we flew back to the US in the dark. We circled, this was in Moultrie. We flew in over Vero Beach in Florida. We came onto land in between high rises in this massive plane flying between these high rise buildings. And we flew up Central Florida and in 20 minutes making a circle in the dark with no lights on in this runway, he found the runway. And I got in the back and started pouring hydraulic fluid into the system, hoping that when he dropped the landing gear, there'd be enough fluid in the system that it would go down and pressure enough to lock itself open. Because once it hit a certain point, the pressure would push it into a lock. And it did. And we landed and we made it.
After you guys land, what happens? What's the process?
So we got our mechanics, were our two guys who were actual airplane mechanics, came and worked on it. And I left again. We left again the next evening for Colombia, and down we went. We landed at a landing strip at a salt mine outside Rio Hacha in the Guajira Peninsula, which is a border between Venezuela and Colombia. It totaled indigenous territory. So we landed there. When we pulled in on the strip, we could see the truckloads of pot, guys running down with machine guns, shooting them in the air. Yeah, it was just like the Wild West. And we landed and lost our nose gear steering. We went off the runway, through a barbed wire fence, barbed wire wrapped around the props, and the plane came screeching to a halt. So it's just a nightmare. The manager of the salt mine is going nuts. Everybody's going nuts. The military's going nuts because we got them paid. So we get out and start to unravel all the wire around the props, and a lot of work. We're trying to get this thing back right, although we have no nose gear steering. But we try and get it out of the cactus field back onto the runway. And so we're powering the engines on the port side, and one of the engines comes fucking flying off the prop, goes flying off the wing, embeds itself in the ground, nearly decimates the person who's standing there, these indigenous people. It was crazy. Anyway, we brought in a guy who was the chief mechanic for an airline called Aero Condor, affectionately known as the Wings of Death, a guy named Juancho Pacheco. He came and fixed the nose gear steering, couldn't do anything about the engine that flew off, but patched it up. patch a hole in it, rework the gas lines, and it would make it on 3 engines. So off we took, 16,000 pounds of pot, 3 engines, got out 2 minutes, and lost the second engine on the same side, and down we went. Got rescued by Indian fishermen,
So what? It
and
goes
it
in the water? You crash in the
goes in the water.
water?
Yeah, we crashed in the water.
What do you
The
do
next
when it
day,
goes in? When it goes in the water, what do you do? Like, what do you do?
we go burst out through the window in the cockpit, and we see these fishermen, these Indian fishermen, that are some ways away from us, and for sure they saw us go down. So we just started swimming in their direction, and they came in our direction and rescued us.
So the
And we
whole
dropped the
plane
name of.
gone. Plane gone.
So the tail of the plane is sticking up. The next day, every fucking newspaper in Colombia had a picture of the tail of this plane sticking out of the Caribbean, and it said, "Plane load of cocaine down off Rio Hacha." And there's no cocaine on that. Of course, it was all marijuana. But cocaine makes for a great headline.
Yeah.
So I did a few things not big after that from Colombia, and then a little bit from Belize, and then met some people who are working in Southeast Asia, and started to put together some massive loads there, and eventually put together the last load I did was 75 tons, and pulled it off with the DEA looking at me.
How do you do that?
I knew that they knew, but they didn't know that I knew they knew. And I orchestrated something for them to look at. And they paid attention to that. And while they were paying attention to that, I, with other ships they knew nothing about, and another offload place they knew nothing about, brought it in. They knew nothing about my trucking company, so that was safe. I filled up my trucks and got all the pot from Alaska to Washington to California. And then I brought my boats down, and when they hit my boats, there was fresh donuts and coffee. There wasn't a cigarette paper on the boats.
When you're smuggling from like Asia and places like that, are you afraid you're going to go to prison?
Nobody. You're only afraid if you're thinking. The whole fucking object of this game is you don't think. You can't think. You make a decision, then you don't fucking think about it.
Yeah.
A person once said to me, this was the third day of a run, no sleep, standing in a friend's kitchen. The complete works of Shakespeare is on her counter. And at that point, I'd never been busted, in any substantial kind of way, other than that small bust years ago. And I had just come back from Colombia with a load of coke. And she said, "How come you don't get busted?" And I said, "Because I don't think about what I do." And she said, "What?" And I said, "I don't think. I make a decision. If I'm confronted with an opportunity, I make a decision to do it or not do it. Whatever the decision is, I don't think about it again. I just go with it, whatever it is." And I find that that gives me access to my gut knower, not my head confuser. At that moment, may God strike me dead. At that moment, I whipped open the complete works of Shakespeare. Pericles, Act 1, Scene 1. This is what I read at that very moment. That it is known is well enough. What grows more known grows worse to smother it. It's like, what did I just say? I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that was the deal, not thinking. And no, you don't think about going to jail, because you think about going to jail, you're going to jail. And I never planned to go to jail, but eventually, there were 110 guys in our crew. They indicted 55 of us. 53 of them talked. Two of us didn't. I didn't, and my chief engineer didn't.
Before we get to that part, say you have a load of you have it, it's coming in. When it hits wherever you're going with it, Can you explain to me what happens next? Like, what do you do? And when you get this money for all this, what are you doing with the money?
Well, it's marijuana, not, and so it's that like that last load was worth about $240 million, and we had places filled with boxes of marijuana and places filled with boxes of money. So a bunch of the money ended up on jets and went to Europe and went to Switzerland and went in banks. A bunch of it bought art. The art was then taken to Europe and sold. Bought the art in New York so you don't have to move the cash. And you buy art that you can sell elsewhere.
And are you buying any flashy things like cars and houses and things like that?
No, no, I had cars, but just like, every American has cars. I just had some cars that you wouldn't know were great cars unless you opened the hoods and looked in there, saw the work that was done on them. We weren't buying any flashy things. My kids still live there in the mountains in Los Angeles, live in a house that was built by a pioneer woman in the early part of the 1900s.
They're not near the fire zone, are they?
They're not far from it right now. It's closing in on them,
Wow, that's pretty crazy what's going on out there.
I'll say.
Where was your base of operation? Was it
California, LA. The last load, the base of operation, the main base on the ground base was Washington, Seattle, but our crew is all California.
so when you're raking in that much, that kind of money? It's like an insane amount. Like, what are your plans with the money? Are you like,
There's when you got 110 people working with you, everybody wants $1 million. Okay,
yeah,
there's only 250 million. The whole project has to be paid for. I mean, it's a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but by the time it gets down to cutting up the jackpot, it's not a whole lot. Our crew is all California.
so when you're raking in that much, that kind of money? It's like an insane amount. Like, what are your plans with the money? Are you like,
There's when you got 110 people working with you, everybody wants $1 million. Okay,
yeah,
there's only 250 million. The whole project has to be paid for. I mean, it's a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but by the time it gets down to cutting up the jackpot, it's not a whole lot.
yeah,
I ended up with um, property and vessels and what have you worth, I don't know, in the vicinity of 15 million or so, and all of that went uh, to the DEA.
now when you get busted, walk me through when you finally get busted.
Okay, so when I ended up with all the money and all that fucking shit was said and done, I hadn't done coke in a long time. I said, I'm going to get a little coke. So I went and bought a kilo of coke. and I took that kilo of into a friend's guest house, and I, over 8 days, drank and smoked myself into a corner as I snorted my brains out, and I had a heart attack day.
You got a heart attack?
And I did. My friend, whose guest house I was in, found me, and he he called the paramedics and what have you, and I got revived, and I ended up. That was the eve of my 40th birthday. I got sober immediately. I went into a hospital in Santa Barbara. I spent a month there. And I stuck around that hospital, became a volunteer there. I became the head of volunteers. Then I started doing groups there and conducting groups. And a couple of years into this, one morning, I'm lying in bed and a knock comes on my door, and I know who's at the door. I got no fucking doubt about it. And I open up the door, and there are two guys standing there with guns in their hand, and one of them says, "Are you Brian O'Day?" And I said, "I wish I wasn't, but I am." And they said, "May we come in?" I said, "You got the guns." And one of them said, "Do you have any guns in here?" And I said, "No, I don't." So the next thing you know, there were 8 cops in my house. I did not get indicted. I did not get arrested that day. They tore my house up. They went down and tore up my storage unit. And then they left. They said, "Get a lawyer." I said, I am going to call my lawyer. And they said, "Don't call your lawyer. We're going to arrest him. You got to get another one." I said, "You're going to arrest my lawyer?" They said, "Oh, yeah, we're going after him." Oh, so yeah, that was an interesting moment in my life. I had a lot of support from the AA community in Santa Barbara, however, and while I did get 10 years, I didn't cooperate. And normally, if you don't cooperate, they don't do anything for you, like do anything to help you get out quicker.
Yeah.
But the DA took a liking for me, and I think he liked the fact that I just decided to keep my mouth shut. And then over 100 people wrote the DA from Santa Barbara who I'd been working with over the past couple of years. And I was a drug and alcohol counselor, and they were saying, "Are you fucking kidding?" And the DA, he couldn't give me any less time because I wouldn't cooperate. So I got 10 to 12 and a half. But I applied for transfer to Canada, which I knew I wasn't going to get because if you don't cooperate, they won't do that because they know you're going to get out early. But he recommended it. So I got transferred after a year to Canada. And then I did a year in Canada, which was 1/5 of my sentence. And then they put me out into a halfway house for 2 years.
Wow.
And then I was on parole for 6 and probation for 4.
You're a Canadian citizen,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
So does that mean you can't go back to the US?
No, I can now. I couldn't for a while, but eventually I got a waiver.
No, Canada will take you back. Like if you leave, you could
Oh,
come back.
oh, of course. I'm a Canadian citizen. They got to let me back.
They won't let me in Canada.
No, you're an American.
I'm a felon.
Yeah, but you can get a waiver. Just like I got a waiver to go to the US, Americans can get a waiver to come to Canada if they have a felony.
Maybe I'll try to do that. I really liked Canada when I went there.
Oh, it's a great country.
Yeah.
And I live in a great part of Canada in Newfoundland. But I'm, spending as much time as I can in Ukraine. I just got back. I'm going back again in March.
Now, what was that like going to Ukraine?
Spectacular. Best thing I ever fucking did. I'm making a movie in Ukraine about the struggle of Ukrainian women during war. Yeah, it's just awesome. Awesome. It's just the greatest thing that I could ever have done.
It's pretty crazy what's going on there right now.
It is.
And how is it out there? Is it really bad?
It is terrible. Yeah, I spent a month just recently in a hospital that didn't exist 3 years ago, a place called Superhuman, and it is for people who have had amputations due to the war. There are 50,000 new amputations in Ukraine as a result of this war.
Oh,
And this hospital, Superhuman, is now one of the leading designers and makers of prosthetic devices in the world, of course. So my film tells the story of a number of the women that I met there who've had their limbs blown off by the Russians.
what made you want to get into that? Like, what was your goal when you were in prison? What was your goal once you got out?
I didn't have a goal. I didn't know what I was going to do.
Just didn't think
Uh,
about it, right?
I didn't think about it. No, I had no idea what I was going to do when I got out of prison. I was going to write a book. I knew that because I wrote it when I was in prison, and I was going to fix it and get it published, which I did. And Random House published it. It won the best nonfiction crime writing in Canada in 2007. It's published all around the world. and I'm actually working with a French director right now who's probably going to make a movie of the book.
Turn your
Yeah,
life story into a movie.
yeah.
What made you want to write a book and
In
get into
prison,
the
I had a lot of time on
prison?
my hands, and I just thought. I first of all, I wrote a newsletter to the people who supported me and telling them what was going on in prison. And at one point, one of them said to me, "Why don't you tell us some of the stories from your life that got you there? Because not we've only known you since you got sober." So I started telling them stories about my life, and I wrote over 2,000 pages and realized I got a book here. So I took it and made it happen.
I'm sure they probably didn't believe some of it because it's so crazy. You're in a plane that crashes into the ocean,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you left out a big chunk of things that happened to you.
Yeah, well, there's, as I said, I wrote over 2,000 pages, and I, uh, I had to get it down to 340 or something. I don't know what it is.
You got to make a series.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Whoever's going to do it's going to do it without me because I've had enough of that story. But I'll take the money.
It seems like a really interesting story. You should try to shop that to Hollywood.
Yeah.
So, how did Ukraine come into your life?
The war started, and somehow it took a grip on me. And I produced a television show a while ago with Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. Actually, co-hosted and produced it. Kevin was the host, and I had a film a cameraman on that show who had a really interesting resume. He had documented the war crimes of Bosnia Herzegovina and Rwanda for the International Criminal Court on video. And oh my God, that was just like the heaviest of jobs, as you could imagine.
Yeah.
And so I said to him, "Frank, what the fuck are you doing this reality show with me and with the resume like that?" And he said, "It's just too much. I couldn't do that anymore." So I got it. And when the war started, something grabbed me about the war. And I'm an old guy. I've seen a lot of wars in my life, and none ever grabbed me like this one. So I called Frank and was having a conversation with him, talking with him about it. And 15 minutes into the call, I said, "Frank, I think we're going to have to go." He said, "Okay, I don't want to, but I will." So I called a friend of mine that owned a television network, and he gave me 30 grand.
Wow.
And I called a government funding agency in Newfoundland that develops film here, and they gave me 45 grand. And I went to Ukraine for a couple of months when the war started, and I came back with 40 hours of footage, but no movie. And so it took me a while to figure out what the movie was, and I've got it completely fucking worked out now. I went back to Ukraine and shot what I needed to develop the story that I need to run with the footage that I've already got. I got 70 hours of footage that I'm going to get an hour and a half movie out of, and it should be done in March.
Any crazy situations happened to you when you were in Ukraine? And what's it like to be
Uh,
in an active war zone?
awesome. How can I say? It was a great camaraderie, everybody doing something together. It was extraordinary. Everybody helping everybody doing whatever they could. Just extraordinary. I went down at the front for a couple of weeks, took a truckload of supplies down to some military outposts, and it was just, it was amazing, man. It was just fucking amazing. I can't wait to go back.
Did you have any close calls where you thought, "Damn, this is pretty dangerous here"?
Yeah, we we were right at the front, and we nearly ended up behind Russian lines at one point. Fortunately, someone saved us. Um, and there was, uh, a For a few days, I wore my body armor all the time.
Oh, you have to walk around with bulletproof vests and things like that and a helmet.
Yeah, in the
Do you,
car, driving, wearing it.
oh man.
Yeah, because they fucking blow your car up.
I mean,
I had body armor on both doors. I was in the back. Body armor's on both doors and on me. And in the back behind me are four containers of petroleum because you can't get gas anywhere. So it's just like we're moving bombs, man, basically.
yeah, you can't smoke either, right?
Oh, the boy smoked. I didn't, but they did.
With gas in the back.
Yep. It was diesel, but still.
Yes, the flames still will catch the fumes, right?
I guess. Anyway, it was great though. I'm so glad I did it, and I'm so glad that I'm a part of this whole thing with Ukraine.
So, what's in store for the future for you?
For me,
Yeah.
I'm going to finish this movie. I'm going to sell it, and you'll never hear from me again.
Right
I'm
out into
going.
the sunset, right?
I'm going to a sunny place, and I'm going to stay there for the rest of my life. I'm old, There's not a lot of time in my life, and I don't like the winter. Right now, I'm in the middle of winter in Newfoundland in the North Atlantic, and I'm going to finish this movie and find a way to get out of the winter.
Well, I wish you nothing but success in the future and
Thank you, Bill.
sending prayers to your kids. Hopefully, they stay out
Thank,
of that danger zone.
thank you, brother.
Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to before we go?
Yeah, Frank in Cleveland. I'll just leave it at that, my beautiful friend, Frankie. Ciao.
If you like this show, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can get my videos every time they drop. And if you don't like the show, do bad. Start your own podcast.
Yeah.